Oh, I know that sound. It's time for the Beer and News Report. Hi, and welcome to the Beer News Report. Cheers. You can see I'm on my big mug that holds 2 beers, halfway through it because I've already done the first half of the show, which was viewer questions. And as you remember from that show, I've doubled it. I've got Pernicious, and that's an IPA, and I don't like IPAs, and I cut it with Michelob Ultra. So that's what's in my mug. It's more drinkable now. If you ever need to cut a beer, if you don't like a beer, cut it with a light beer. It makes it go down so much smoother. Cheers. If you saw the viewer questions show, this is in response to the questions about the Electoral College and the U.S. Census. I'm going to go into all the presidents got elected without winning the popular vote. I'm going to talk about how they did it and what the effects it had. And then I want to discuss the Electoral College, break down why it was made and how it's used today. And finally, I'm going to talk about the U.S. Census and its effect on the Electoral College. This is all going to happen on this show, so sit back, grab a beer, get ready to learn. Cheers. How many presidents did not win the popular vote? If you saw my show on viewer questions, you already know the answer, but I'm going to tell you anyways. It's 5. And starting with the oldest one and going to the most recent, it goes John Quincy Adams, Rutherford Hayes, Benjamin Harrison, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. Now, which one was the least contentious? I already told you that in my past show, but do you remember? Donald Trump. You know, most people don't want to believe this because they just don't like Donald Trump. But as you're about to find out, he won it fair and square in an election where most people didn't like either candidate. But we're not going to start there. We're going to start with John Quincy Adams. In that election, he was going against Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson won both the popular vote and the Electoral College. Wait a minute. Isn't that all you have to do to get elected? Yes, but you have to do it by a majority. So here's the breakdown. It's the 1824 election, and there are 4 candidates running, all in the same party called the Democratic Republican Party. Yeah, that's right. It had both names in the party. Look at the 4 candidates are Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, William Crawford, and Henry Clay. Now, how can 4 candidates all be in the same party? Because the Democrat-Republican Party just smoked the Federalist Party over the years. It did it so bad that the Federalists just gave up. So there's only one party to pick from. Now, in the first round, Jackson missed getting the Electoral College majority by 32 electoral votes. So they had a second round. And in the 12th Amendment, it states that only the top 3 candidates can be voted on. So Henry Clay's out. But Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House. And he had some pull with the other congressmen. And he also liked John Quincy Adams way more than Andrew Jackson. So he started pulling some strings. Then the second round of the election happens, and Andrew Jackson gets 99 votes, and John Quincy Adams only gets 84 votes. So Jackson beat him, right? But wait a minute. How can that be? Because John Quincy Adams was the 6th president. He won that election. What happened? No one knows for sure, but Congress picked Adams as president and just pushed aside Jackson. Coincidentally, now that Adams is president, he needs a Secretary of State. Can you guess who he picked? Yeah, it was Henry Clay. Jackson was livid, right? He said the election was stolen and basically was right, but nobody backed him. And he said that obviously this is corruption. It shows by making Henry Clay Secretary of State, but nobody listened to him. But Jackson had the last laugh because he left the Democratic Republican Party and started his own party. Can you guess what that is? I'll give you a second. Cheers. Jackson starts the Democratic Party, and he won the next election. So what happened to the Democratic Republican Party? It just shortened it down and became the Republican Party. So now you know why it's called the GOP, which stands for the Grand Old Party. It's because the Republican Party has been around the longest. Now I'll come back to the president. Donald Trump feels like the election was stolen from him. There's no evidence to prove this, and clearly nothing like what happened in the 1824 election happened. But he still feels like it was stolen. The rumor has it that he wants to start his own party called the Patriot Party. This is following the trails left by Andrew Jackson, and if history's any indicator, starting a new party might be a winning move. It worked for Jackson. But before you jump up and down for joy and dance around for the Patriot Party, let's look at history again after Jackson gets elected. He ends up pissing off so many people that they start a new party to defeat him. And that's how the Whig Party got started. They got people from the Democratic Party that Jackson pissed off, and then they got some people from the old Democratic Republican Party. They got some people from the defunct Federalist Party and others. It was enough to win and get Jackson out of there. So if you think times are tumultuous now, it is nothing like what was happening in the early 1800s. Okay, on to the 1876 elections where Republican Rutherford Hayes beats Democrat Samuel Tilden. In this election, there were problems with the Electoral College, so Congress stepped in and decided who won. Yeah, that sounds like fun. Cheers. Here we have an election, and the electoral votes are coming in. Tilden won the popular vote and needs one more vote in the Electoral College to get a majority. Tilden has 184 electoral votes, and Hayes has 166. But 3 states have their electoral votes disputed, and those are South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida. Really? Florida? Have these guys ever voted correctly? So a commission was set up. The House is controlled by the Democrats, but the Senate is controlled by the Republicans. So they take 5 members from the House and 5 members from the Senate, but that adds up to an even number, so they add 5 members to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court. Do you now know why it's important to have the court thinking like your party? So they start debating on February 1st, and it doesn't stop until March 2nd. That's 2 days before the inauguration. So as usual, everyone voted along party lines. And in an 8-7 victory, Hayes wins. Now, did this bring back memories of the Bush-Gore election where the Supreme Court got involved and made the deciding factor on who won the election? We've all been here before, in case you forgot. And if you do forget, history will repeat itself. Cheers. Okay, now we're at the 1888 elections between Benjamin Harrison and Grover Cleveland. Cleveland's a Democrat, and he's running for re-election. Both these guys had a unique way of campaigning. Cleveland only gave one speech, and that was his acceptance speech. Harrison made no public appearances, but he gave speeches from his home. It was called the Front Porch Campaign. There's one issue on everybody's mind, and that's tariffs. Cleveland wants to lower tariffs, not get rid of them, and Harrison wants to keep the tariffs high. Tariffs, huh? Does that ring any bells? Trump ran on tariffs and he won. It's almost like there's an election playbook, and if you can get your hands on it, you'll win. Now, just because the 2 men running are civil, that doesn't mean their campaign supporters were. And here's where the election gets dirty. A new term came around that made the elections particularly corrupt. That term is called floaters. Now, floaters are people who are undecided, but they're willing to vote the way you want if you pay them. Now, how do we know this? Because a letter was found in the Republican state of Illinois, and it showed that Republicans were paying to buy votes over what the Democrats were willing to pay. It wasn't any better in the South. The South was turning Democrat because of the Civil War. And if you remember, Lincoln was a Republican, and all the black people down South, they had turned Republican because Lincoln freed them, right? It makes sense. So the South decided to shut down the black vote. And this is when the Jim Crow laws really took effect. So what happened? Cleveland won the popular vote because of the South, but Harrison smoked them in the Electoral College. And Cleveland even lost his home state in New York because of Tammany Hall. And Tammany Hall's a political force in New York City. A little trivia on the southern states. Lincoln in the Civil War turned the South into the Democrat. They were Republican, but they flipped and went Democrat. Pretty much stayed that way till the 1960s. Now, do you remember what happened in the 60s? Well, nobody does because there are too many drugs going around. But I'm going to fill you in. Kennedy got assassinated, and Lyndon Baines Johnson, or LBJ, becomes president. And he pushes through the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These officially abolished the Jim Crow laws. The South was so mad that they left the Democratic Party and became Republican, which is where we are now. The question is, are they going to flip anytime soon? We'll find out. Cheers. Now, over 100 years goes by, and every president that's been elected has won both the popular vote and the Electoral College. Then comes the 2000 elections between Republican George W. Bush and Democrat Al Gore. Now, Al Gore has been vice president for the last 8 years under President Clinton, so people knew who he was. George Bush was governor of Texas, but his father had been a one-term president just before Clinton, so everyone knew the Bush name. This was a very close election. And it came down to one state who would decide who would become president. That state, I've mentioned it before, it's Florida. The results were so close that before they could announce who won, they had to do an automatic recount. Then Secretary of State Katherine Harris certified Bush as the winner by 537 votes. That's how close it was. I mean, there's millions and millions of voters in Florida, and it came down to 537 votes. Now, Gore sued, saying that not all the ballots had been counted. And this was true because there was a bunch of punch cards pushed aside because they had anomalies like hanging chads or dimpled chads. So the Florida Supreme Court sided with Gore. And then Bush went to the U.S. Supreme Court, which reversed the Florida decision in a 5-4 vote, and Bush won the election. The U.S. Supreme Court declared that the recounting of ballots was too spurious and not done with any set procedure. Many people felt the election was stolen by the Supreme Court, but, they have the final say. Again, it helps to have the Supreme Court have the same beliefs as your party's beliefs. Why do you think Trump put in all those federal judges? Somebody on his team knew his or her history. Cheers. Now we come to the latest election, which is the one between Republican Donald Trump and Democrat Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump is well known as a businessman. He's a TV personality. Hillary Clinton is the wife of the former president, Bill Clinton, and she's also a U.S. Senator. Now, Hillary Clinton's strategy was to go after the big populous states like California, New York, and she beat Trump there handedly. Wasn't even close. Trump decided to go for narrow victories in battleground states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan. In the end, Trump lost the popular vote by the widest margin ever, but convincingly won in the Electoral College. And it's the Electoral College that gets you into office. So there's no scandal in this election, but losing the popular vote by 2.8 million votes was the largest difference in the history of presidential elections. And this is what is driving people crazy because so many votes didn't matter. 2.8 million votes is more than the population of Wyoming, Vermont, Alaska, and North Dakota combined. So what is the Electoral College? How does it work? And why was it formed? Let's have a drink and then talk about it. Cheers. The Electoral College is made up of 538 people. Basically, it's every senator and representative from every state plus 3 people from Washington, D.C. The Electoral College is a process, and it's part of the original design of the Constitution. And in order to fix it, you have to get a constitutional amendment. Now, they've already done one. It's the 12th Amendment, and this expanded voting rights. The states now have the popular vote to determine who the electors in the Electoral College will be. Because when America first started, only adult white men, those usually owning property, were eligible to vote. So no women, no enslaved blacks, no Native Americans. And in many states, even poor white people weren't allowed to vote. There have been several amendments to the Constitution to open up voting to other peoples, right? The 17th Amendment gave us the right to vote for senators directly. The 19th Amendment gave the right to vote to women. The 23rd, 24th, and 26th Amendments gave the residents of Washington, D.C. voting rights. They barred racist poll tax, and they lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. So it is possible to make changes, but again, passing an amendment is hard to do. Now, states want power, and they want to keep their power, meaning that small states with a low population have more voting power than states with a large population. But why is that? In 1929, the Permanent Apportionment Act was passed, and that limited the size of the House of Representatives to 435 people. This happened because after the 1920 census, a battle erupted between rural and urban factions, causing the House of Representatives to fail to reapportion itself. With this act, a procedure was put in place to automatically reapportion the House seats after every decennial census. So that is why, after every census, the seats in the House get reapportioned, just like what happened after the 2020 census. At a minimum, every state gets 1 representative. So a small state like Wyoming or Vermont, they'll get 1 representative. But states with big populations like California or Texas are limited to how many representatives they can have. For instance, California has 53 representatives for a population of roughly 40 million. Each representative has about 755,000 people. Now, Wyoming has a population of 590,000 for its 1 representative. That means that California representatives have 165,000 more people than Wyoming. So if you total them up, 8,745,000 Californians don't really have an equal vote. Now, 2 states have decided to make their electoral college more fair. They allow for the Electoral College to be split. Can you name those 2 states? All other states have a winner-take-all in their Electoral College. So in big states like California, where 24% of the vote is Republican, and there are 55 electoral college votes, it basically means that Republicans lose 13 votes when a Democratic president wins the state. The smaller the state population, the less electoral college votes there are to lose if you were to split the vote. So states with large populations don't want to give up this power. Okay, are you ready? The two states that allow their electoral college to be split are Maine and Nebraska. Did you get it right? You did? Cheers. Finally, let's talk about the census. This happens every 10 years, and it just recently happened, even though there was a pandemic going on. And this has people wondering if there's enough time that was spent to get to all the people in the states with large populations. For instance, New York is going to lose a seat in the House because they missed the census by 89 people. Surely, if New York had more time, they could have recorded 89 more people. But hey, nothing's perfect. Errors are going to happen. That's just a part of life. We had the census, and that's now how it's going to be for the next 10 years. If you've seen the news, then you know that 6 states are gaining House seats. And those states are Montana, Colorado, Florida, North Carolina, and Oregon. Those are the states that are going to gain 1 seat. Texas will gain 2 seats. On the downside, there are states that are losing seats, and that's Illinois, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, West Virginia, and California. Now let's take a look at this. The states that are gaining seats are in the West and in the South. The states that are losing seats are basically in the East and in the North, and then there's California. Now, I'm going to pick on California because I live here. Last year, California lost 182,000 people. They moved out. Now, let's say that this is a trend that's going to happen for the next 10 years. And my guess is that the baby boomers are retiring, and California is a high-tax state. So you want to retire to a low-tax state. That's like Florida, Arizona, Texas. So it's safe to assume that the majority of people leaving California are Democrats, right? Because that's the majority party here. If you have 182,000 people who are leaving a Democratic state and going into a Republican state, there's the possibility that in 10 years that Republican state will turn Democratic. Now, Arizona's already done this. It's flipped to Democrat in the last election. Texas has pockets, right? Houston, Austin, Dallas, these are all Democratic cities. And as for Florida, well, where do New Yorkers go? They go to Florida. We all know this from watching Seinfeld. New York is similar to California in its majority party and population size. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 10 years, right? Cheers. Well, I did it. 2 beers down. It was a good 2 shows. I'm feeling kind of good. I should have had lunch before I did this. But anyways, if you want to contact me, I can be reached at this email. I hope you liked the show or the shows. If you did, click that like button. Of course, if you want to get notified, you click that subscribe button and then the bell icon next to it, and it'll tell you when I posted a new show. Till then, keep your beer cold and your interest hot. Cheers.